My name is Kris Ketels. I am working in the standards department of SWIFT. SWIFT is a cooperative society that is owned by its members. We have 11,000 members and we are a financial network globally. Being a cooperative society means that we do not make profit. Our money goes back and flows back to our banks. Okay, I have two hats in my company. My first hat is a commercial hat, but my second hat is a non-commercial one, whereby I am serving as my role as a community for the community to actually help the community standardize their business. That is why I'm here today. So I'm not gonna give you a sales pitch at all today. So today I'm going to talk about standards and why standards are so important in open banking. I think the timing here is perfect. Brazil is on the verge of starting an open banking exercise. And we in Europe, where I'm coming from, we have already gone through all of the exercise of standardizing open banking. And I would like to share some of my experiences doing so, because I think some of these things will definitely be of very much use to you as well. So there's three things I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to talk about why standards are so important right now for you in the Brazil market. The second subject is going to be how a typical gateway API platform should look like in an open banking environment, again, based on what we've been doing for the last couple of years. And the third one, I'm going to show you some interesting use cases and opportunities that are opening up as a result of open banking. So first of all, I'm going to talk about standardization and the role of ISO 20022 in that. So this is a nice picture that I took from the internet, actually. On the left-hand side, you see the situation that you have today, or I would say 5 years ago here in Brazil, whereby you as a bank are exposing your services through a single channel, a proprietary channel. There was no need for you to talk to others but your customers. What has changed over the last years through open banking is that many of those services are now being done or performed or will be performed by third-party providers. And this is an extremely disrupting change in your payments landscape. Let me show you an example of what this means. This is something that I took from the internet just a couple of days ago as well. It shows you a number of things. It shows you first how many players there are entering in this game. This is a new game for you all. In the past, if you would have taken a picture of this 10 years ago, you would only have seen banks. If you look at it now, most of them are not banks. What is more interesting even is if you look at these, I don't know whether you can read these things, but there's the red boxes. You see the different microservices that are now being defragmentized through open banking. So you would see now payment processing, payment acceptance, remittance, accounting, payment gateway. All of these things used to be owned inside of a single bank, of your bank. And now all of these things have been torn apart and they are now offered by specialized companies. This is really a big difference. And this is what's going to happen here in Brazil as well. You may think it's not going to happen, but it is going to happen. I'm going to quote a large banker who was saying, you can either try to join this, or you can be like the dinosaurs and wait for the meteorite to fall. These are only two possibilities. Okay, so you can imagine that now that you have this extremely hyper-fragmented landscape, that the need for communication and definitely for standardization is extremely high. If you don't do it like that, if you do not standardize, it will mean that you as a service provider, whether you're a bank or not, it doesn't matter, you will need to be able to support the different proprietary standards that everyone is using. This is going to cost you a lot. In PSD2, in Europe, we have had the same problem. What happened was that the regulatory authority, they wrote a specification saying, look, guys, you will have to create some open banking standards for account management and payment initiation. But they did not say how. They just said, you do it. The result was that everyone went its own way. And now you have the large financial institutions and large players in Europe that knocked on our doors of SWIFT because we are a standards organization, asking us, please help us standardize this landscape, because now we will have to support more than 20 different variations of exactly the same thing. In France, they've done it differently. In UK, they've done it differently. In Germany, they did it differently. And even within a certain countries, you have different implementations of exactly the same thing. And this is a missed opportunity. This is a thing that you must avoid from happening. You have to agree. It doesn't matter what standard it is. There's not a best standard, but you have to agree on you need to standardize these things. Now, why ISO 20022 is so important, I believe is so important, and that's what I'm evangelizing as well, is for the following. First of all, ISO 20022 is about the commoditized business. What do I mean by that? It standardizes the stuff that everyone is doing. What is an account? What is a payment? It does not standardize things that give you a competitive advantage. Once you have a competitive advantage, you do not standardize. It wouldn't make sense. Why would you give what gives you a competitive advantage to everyone else? You will only do that once the competitive advantage is gone, right? So ISO 20022 is the same. It only standardizes the things that you all do. Payment initiation, bank account management, the typical open banking services. So all of these institutions, they have their own data objects. What we have done over the last 15 years with ISO 20022 is we have standardized all of these components. So we've been defining these components for 15 years in all kinds of markets: payments, securities, trade, finance, financial trading, what have you, cards. And as a result of that, we now have all of these components and artifacts in a large repository that we can now reuse to build APIs. Because ISO 20022 at the time was designed for future technology changes. We knew 15 years ago that we had to build a standard that was going to resist the changes that were going to happen because of technology. And now we can, if we want, generate not only messages, but also APIs from the same components. We can generate smart contracts, DLT contracts. All of these things are part of ISO 20022 built in. This is just an example. I'm going to quickly browse to it, but it just shows you an example of what an account is, the standardization of these things. On the right-hand side, you see the stories that we've captured in our vast repository. The right-hand side is a story of what a payment is, that it can be ordered, the state can be authorized, it can be accepted, it can be cleared, etc. So all of these things are in there. You can imagine if you design a new API or a set of APIs that you just go to the repository and take the stories and the components that you feel are important for your design. So on the left-hand side, this is this vast ISO 20022 repository at your disposal. But on the right-hand side, you have the tooling for designing APIs. I've seen that one of the vendors here is MuleSoft. These guys are really good at designing tools to help you create APIs. There's another one called Swagger Hub. So what we have said with ISO was, look, on the one hand side, you have this huge, great financial library, and on the other side, you have these great API design tools. What if you were to bring these two together? That will give you an extremely powerful tooling to standardize APIs in the financial world. And this is what we've done. And this is our role within the world financial community, is to help you standardize these things. So let me talk a little bit about our gateway. But this doesn't have to be a Swift API gateway. This can be any gateway. So if you sell a gateway, or if you use a gateway, you're not special. Everyone has a gateway nowadays. If you think of, you can buy a gateway at Amazon for 50 euros a month. So this is not what gives you a competitive advantage. But what I'm going to mention here is, what features does a gateway need to have in order to be successful in open banking? And this is really important, because if you don't have these, you're going to fail. It's as simple as that. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I've seen it happen in Europe as well. It has a number of features that you must have. I'm not going to cover all of them. The one that I, of course, think is the most important is the fact that you have standardized API contracts. Why do you need that? Because a standardized API contract fosters mashups. And a mashup is a combination of different microservices to come up with a new service. I give you an example. Uber is a mashup of the Google API to find your location, of the MasterCard API to pay, and of some internal features that they have designed. And combining these three things together, they brought up and came up with a great new service. And this is what APIs is all about, and especially in open banking. In open banking, they have torn apart all of the core services into microservices, and it's up to you to find those microservices and combine those to give you a new service that is unique in the market. And this is what's happening today as well. The market is changing so rapidly. There are new vendors coming around the block, inventing new things by just mashing up existing micro APIs. Another example of things that you do need to have in a gateway, whatever gateway it may be, that you will definitely have to have, is the single identification and the security components. The challenge here is a contradicting one. What is it? It is the fact that on one hand side, you want to make sure that your participants are who they claim to be, and on the other side, you want to have a frictionless environment. These are two very difficult things to combine because they contradict each other. And as a service provider, this is what will give you a competitive advantage as well. So I'm going to give you a number of use cases now. Use cases that we have developed as community APIs towards for everyone to reuse and use as such. I'm going to also talk about the PSD2 Convergence Working Group. Why? Because, as I said, in PSD2, we have a big problem. For the moment, we have an extremely fragmented API landscape. We have so many APIs that are doing exactly the same thing. And let's be honest, a payment is a payment and it's not rocket science at all. So if you have to implement all of these different variations, this is going to cost you a lot. So that's why the community in Europe asked us, Swift, because we are a standards organization, to start converging all of these different initiatives into a single standard using ISO 20022. Then we have also created what we call an open banking extensions working group, where we are standardizing a number of what we believe are core microservices that everyone should use and need inside of open banking. That these APIs are there for everyone, free to use. You can have a look at them. They're available on our API website. If you type into Google Swagger Hub and pay later, for instance, Google will guide you towards this website. And then finally, I'm going to give you a nice story about web payments and what tracked web payments are. So GPI tracker. This is the instant cross-border payment. The only thing I want to say about this is the following. Instant payments are mandated, I was told, to be ISO 20022. Now, domestically, this doesn't per se mean a lot, but if you will have cross-border payments coming inside of your country, it will mean that you will probably have to support the features that are part of the cross-border ISO 20022 payment, and that one contains GPI information. GPI, for those who don't know what it is a feature or a functionality that allows you to track the payment in cross-border payments. And this has been, over the last 10 years, a problem with banks in cross-border payments, because sometimes it's very difficult for an institution to know where his payment is in a cross-border payment. And the GPI tracker is offering now this opportunity in the same way as you transfer goods when you buy goods on the internet, that you can track where your goods are. In the same way, you as a merchant can now track where the payment is in the cross-border chain. Okay. So this is the challenge that we're having right now, is aligning all of these standards in PSD2. On the irony of the whole story is the fact that PSD2 was there to open the market, and as a result, for the moment, we are faced with an extremely fragmented implementation of that open market. And I think this is the thing, as I said, and I cannot emphasize enough, this is a thing that you will have to stress upon when you're designing your open banking systems is to not compete on the standards. To quote IBM, standards is not the area where you compete. You do not create stickiness on standards. It is a bad design. Short term, it will work, but you will lose because ultimately your proprietary design will be isolated from the standard. And then you will have to build bridges with the standard, which is a costly affair, and you will be marketed out. That's typically how it works. So we've been working on this effort to bring those together. We have now monthly meetings, and the next meeting in next week, I think it is, we will publicize the account management API resources, and soon after that we will also publish the payment initiation resources. You can reuse those if you want. The nice thing, if you reuse these things that we are publishing, is that you are guaranteed that if someone else is implementing the same thing or something similar using ISO 20022, that they will be interoperable. And that is, I think, key for anything that you design. So pre-authorization is a typical thing that you have in open banking, which is really key to most of the banking services that you will provide. And it is allowing you, as in the same way as you do with cards, when you go to a hotel, for instance, and you book you book your room, typically they ask you for your credit card. And what they do is they block an amount of money on that credit card, so that when you leave, they will actually take the actual amount that you have spent in that hotel. The reason why they do that is because they need some escrow, they need some guarantee, of course, that you won't run off. And that's the whole principle. This pre-authorization is pre-authorizing an amount on your cards. But this can also work for banks, and this is important, that banks can also start using this feature in open banking, so that you can start competing with the card companies to offer exactly the same services, for instance, on the web. Now, these are a number of APIs that are there for you to use, ISO 20022 based, that you can use to build your services that require a pre-authorization of funding. Another example that I have there is the gas station. The gas station is where you go and get some gas, and typically what happens is that a certain amount, fixed amount, is blocked if you cannot exceed that amount. And actually, when you actually have done the gas filling up your tank, the actual amount will be removed. And a third one is the basket of goods. It's a typical thing where you have a large purchase of different types of goods, and they're only delivered each individually, and so each time that you deliver something, something has to be retrieved. Therefore, the pre-authorization works as well. Now, this is a nice one. So the payment request, there is an organization called W3C, and this is an organization from the World Wide Web. These are the guys that are developing protocols like HTTP. So if you look in your browser, you can see the HTTP on your browser. So these are the guys that invented basically everything that you need to be able to work on the web. They have decided a couple of years ago to standardize web payments. The reason why they do that. So first of all, you have to know that who's in that group. All of the large players. You have Google, Amazon, you have Apple, you have Microsoft, and banks as well. And they're all sitting together. And what are they doing? They are actually creating a piece of software in all of the browsers that will streamline payments. And the reason why they're doing that is the following. This is a survey that was taken 2 years ago, in 2017, they were asking why are certain shopping carts abandoned when you shop on the web. What is the reason why shopping carts are abandoned? And there's plenty of reasons, and you've been there. You've done probably the same thing. You're on the web, you're shopping, and then you go to checkout, and all of a sudden, there's a reason why you actually say, no, I'm not going to do this. One of them could be that they want you to create an account again. And you say, well, this is the 15th time that I'm doing it. Don't want to do that anymore. Another one is that it takes too long for this checkout process. Another one is that when you get to checkout, all of a sudden additional charges are there that weren't there when you were starting to purchase, and so on. Another one, a final one, is that this thing is solving is that when they were going to check out, that their preferred payment method wasn't there. All right. So, what this payment handler from W3C that is built in now in all browsers is doing is that it will allow a bank to create its payment method in that payment handler, and then that payment handler will support that all over in all of the browsers that you have all over the internet. So all of a sudden you can say, look, I'm doing, this is how, this is MasterCard, I'm putting in that payment handler, and that will be supported. And what the payment handler actually does is it will compare the merchant's payment methods to yours, and it will only show those methods that are of interest, that are matching, of course, the ones that you require with the ones that are coming from the merchant. Now, why is that so interesting? Because if I go back here to the previous one, it creates a consistent checkout. What it did, for instance, is it stores all of your credentials once, only once, and it's not part of the browser. It's stored somewhere safe. And each time that you are on the merchant website, the browser will take that information and use that throughout. The interesting thing is that they found a way, I don't know why, because I'm not that technical, to avoid that the merchant can actually reuse all of that information for commercial or other reasons as well. So they can use it, of course, to ship. It's difficult not to, but for other reasons, it becomes very difficult for them to do so. So I think it's a really neat thing. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because we are involved in that, in standardizing that, because our network is not really involved in web payments. But why are we then involved? Because ultimately, these things end up in a bank. Most of these web payments hopefully end up in a bank somewhere. And if they end up in a bank, all the international banks, they are ISO 20022 enabled. And if those web payments are not using ISO 20022, then they will have to convert again. And there's a cost attached to it. And that is why we, Swift, are involved purely as a standards organization again. Now, to give you an example of a mashup, this is a complex drawing. Don't focus on it. Just listen, okay? So there is this GPI that I just explained. GPI is a little API that will allow you to track your payment. And what we have done, and it took us, I think, a half a day or 1 day to build a mashup, which is linking the payment handler to this GPI tracker API. And all of a sudden, what does it mean? That a merchant that has a website whereby people are going through the checkout that is using the payment handler, they are immediately enabled with this tracking device, tracking the payment throughout the web. So it's a very powerful solution with a two very simple APIs. And I think this is actually the bottom line of what I want to say here. There's two things actually I want to say here. First of all, the power of micro APIs is incredible. The sky is the limit, and this is why this payment landscape is changing so rapidly. Is because if you have a great idea, you're going to have so much market advantage above the others. Like an idea like this one, it's easy, it's thoughtful. And the second one is, if there's anything that you want to remember from this, is the need to get your act together and make sure that we're all using the same standard. And our role in there has been an international role since the beginning. I'm talking about 35 years ago, where we standardize flows and components for our own community, which are the banks. So in this particular case, we can help there as well. We have over 40 people in Swift that are paid only to standardize. I don't think there's any organization in finance that has such an amount of people that are doing this, and they're all ISO 20022 experts. So I think it's an opportunity. I'm not saying you have to do that, but I think if you don't do that, at least make sure that whatever you do, that it's a common standard, especially now that Brazil is going, I would say, international in the next coming years, that they're opening up, I would say, their financial borders, if I may say so. You will be faced more and more with standards coming out of your country into your country, and most of these standards are ISO 20022 enabled.